Let's begin if y'all would like, and we'll let people continue to filter in here, but we'll go ahead and get our program started. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our 2020 Georgia Legislative Policy Forum. I'm Kyle Wingfield. I'm the president and CEO of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and on behalf of our entire staff and our Board of Trustees, we're very glad you joined us this morning. If you've attended this event in the past, you're well aware that this year's edition is quite different. Like so much in our society, we've had to adapt to our current circumstances. In fact, that's the theme for this year's event, Wisdom, Justice, Adaptation. As you probably know, that's a play off the state's motto, and we believe adaptation is the right focus for this year's session. Speaking of this year's sessions, today is our second event, as I said. If you missed last week's opening keynote with U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, you can find that on our YouTube channel, Georgia Policy. And after today's panel, we'll be back here for the next 5 Tuesdays at 11 a.m. to explore the ways Georgians, their families, their businesses, and their government are adapting to a changed world. We'll cover the budget, land use and transportation, the economy, housing, and healthcare. We have exciting panels of experts just like today's lined up for each of those, and we hope you'll be able to join us for as many of those as possible. We're grateful to be joined on this journey by some key sponsors, without which our work would not be possible. They are our presenting sponsor, AT&T, our platinum sponsors, Verizon and the Walton Family Foundation, and our silver sponsor, Georgia Association of Realtors. We thank each of them for their support of this event, whereas tickets for our all-day Georgia Legislative Policy Forum have cost about $100 a piece in the past. We're pleased to have been able to offer this year's outstanding lineup of speakers to you at no charge. And if you are so moved, we would appreciate your voluntary support of our work as well. And you can visit georgiapolicy.org/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution. During this morning's program and the ones that follow, we'd like to hear questions from you in the audience. You can submit those to us in the chat or Q&A boxes on your screen. Just type your question there, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can in the time we have. So without further delay, it's my great honor to welcome our opening speaker this morning before our panel gets started, and that is Jan Jones. As most of you know, Representative Jones is the Speaker Pro Tem of the Georgia House of Representatives, a longtime advocate of helping Georgia's students and improving education in Georgia, and she's going to give us a brief overview of kind of the state of education in the state of Georgia. So, Jan, please take it away.
Well, thank you, Kyle, and welcome to the fellow panelists and also all those who are viewing this session today. You know, it's such a changing time in Georgia and throughout the country with education. If we had held this in the fall, you know, we would be having a very different conversation than today. Many of Georgia's students in particular will not be in classrooms in early August as we expected. Many were planning to, but daily I'm hearing about more school systems that will not. And as of right now, gosh, I think at least 30% of Georgia's children, they've already announced they will not be going to class, which really is a problem in opening our economy up, parents working, and frankly, online is a wonderful way to learn for many children, but it doesn't work, as many of you know, for all family situations and all children. And so I'm gravely concerned that Georgia's children, many of them will fall behind. And so, but, you know, in talking about other options, we do have a fairly robust charter school situation with online schools. We have the Georgia Virtual School, which is not an online school, but high school students can take, gosh, over 100 classes online. And that's available to homeschool children, children in just any situation, private or public. You know, I've been looking, and I think we're going to be talking about these, I don't know what the proper word to call them, pod schools, micro schools, but I do believe this will be the springboard of a lot of change long term. I don't think you're going to put the genie back in the bottle because with school systems making such a sweeping decision to have all children at home for some, we don't know how long it'll be. I think parents are going to be looking, or I know parents are looking for alternatives. And we will need to address some of this legislatively, but I do think there are workarounds in the meantime to allow for just about any iteration of how someone wants to educate their children. In some cases, it could have some public funding. In other cases, it will not, depending on whether you go the homeschool, whether you define it as a homeschool or as a private school. But we don't have as many options for funding as we need. And I do think as a legislature, we need to address that, because many of our homeschooling laws and our private school laws were written at a time that doesn't reflect what we see today. And it is a much broader group of parents and children that will be seeking alternatives. And even with the homeschool with the situation with school systems having learning take place at home, we're already seeing in Georgia that it's going to look different in different school systems, because as most of you know, we're very much a local control state in our Constitution. So Fulton County, the teachers will actually be in the classrooms every day. The students will be at home until they make a change and decide to have some of them come back on different days. In other cases, we have school systems in which the teachers will be at home. And in other cases, we have school systems that, at least in the spring, offered neither packets for their children to learn, paper, nor did they offer online. And those children truly were left behind. And so I will be eager, along with many of my colleagues, to see what changes have they made, because the state on average pays half of every education dollar in Georgia, and we're not paying for no learning to take place and no instruction. We're paying for delivery of a service. And so many school systems did as good a job as you could, but some truly failed and failed our children. And it wasn't just because of a lack of resources or a lack of internet connectivity, because we saw some very rural school systems do an excellent job. And so there's a lot of room for change, but I'll stop there, and I'm eager to learn from my fellow panelists who know more about some of these particular areas than I do.
Right, great. Well, thank you so much, and it's a perfect lead in to the discussion that we're going to have here, and so we appreciate that very much. I'd now like to introduce our moderator for today, and that is Eric Wearne, who's an associate professor at Kennesaw State University, a senior fellow with us at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and the author of the forthcoming book, Little Platoons, Defining Hybrid Homeschools in America. Again, the bios for the rest of our panelists are on our, you can find those on our homepage and with the program. And so Eric, I'll let you take it away.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Kyle. I'll start by introducing the rest of our panelists. As Kyle said, their bios are online, and I'm going to spend time asking them about themselves. So they'll fill in some of those gaps that way. But we have Angela Lassetter, the head of school for the Georgia Cyber Academy, Ann Martin, who's a writer known as the Libertarian Homeschooler, and Kelly Smith, the founder of Prenda Microschools, coming in from Arizona. So just to start, I don't think that Kyle is clairvoyant, but he scheduled this panel really well because just yesterday, afternoon, the Archdiocese of Atlanta announced that they're going to go back to school live in person in August. A few hours before that, Gwinnett County, the biggest public school system in the state, announced that they're going to go fully online to start the school year. So that has caused a little bit of a stir. People aren't sure what to do or what their role is anymore in some circumstances. In my own work with hybrid homeschools, where the kids go to school even in normal times 2 or 3 days a week, and they're home the rest of the week, there's a lot of variation in how they see themselves. So if you ask them, a hybrid homeschooler will say, some of them will say, oh yes, we're absolutely, we're homeschoolers. We just go to school a couple days a week. But you can go down the street to a school that's set up the same way, and those people will say, oh, no, we're not homeschoolers. We go to a private school. So I have 2 related questions to start us off with. First, for people in some place like Gwinnett or other school systems that have gone fully online, what exactly are they doing now? What would you call it? And second, this panel includes, the head of an online school, an experienced homeschooler, the founder of a set of micro schools. How would you advise parents to kind of get through this based on your particular experiences, right? So let's start with Angela, the online school leader. So what would you say people are doing this fall, and how would you advise them? You're on mute, Angela.
I apologize. Thank you. Lovely technology at work. You'd think I would be better at it being the head of a virtual school. So apparently I'm showing my age. But apparently I want to, it's a difficult question. I think of virtual school a little differently even than some of the other online schools throughout the country, because we're changing the model. We are an independent, not-for-profit online school. Fully online. We do not prescribe to any one curriculum or measure. So that's unlike schools throughout the country that claim to be virtual in a lot of respects. I would say that the school systems that I've seen were doing emergency learning. I'm not sure that that constitutes a virtual school. My students go to school 5 days a week. They get 6 subjects per day. The teachers are fully online. They take attendance by the fact that they attend live classes. I can tell you how many students finish lessons, whether they are online, whether they are offline, whether they recorded sessions. I believe in online school with accountability, especially since I'm being funded by taxpayer dollars. And that's not to say that I think this is bad. I am formerly a homeschool parent. So I am the unusual superintendent in the state of Georgia that believes in private, public, virtual, and homeschool. And I think that parents should be the decision makers about their students' schooling. If they can make decisions for medical or how their children, their dietary reasons, why they can't make decisions about what is best for their children from an educational standpoint is wrong. So I am not your normal superintendent. But I would say that right now from what I've seen, and I really honestly don't know, I'm not casting stones at anybody because it takes work to learn to be a true virtual school and to do it well. I would say it's correspondence course in some places or distance learning in others. I would say it's emergency schooling in others. I haven't seen a school system at this moment that, or heard of a school system, and I am obviously not privy to all the plans of the public school system that are opening up, but one-to-one technology is huge. You have to have it, and you have to have interconnectivity, and you have to have an adult presence at home to be able to monitor students' attendance. So I'm encouraged that they're taking steps to make it more consistent. But I'm truly worried that virtual school in and of itself, this is the parents' view of what that is, and that is not actually what they are getting at this moment.
Anna, what do you think?
Well, I think people are talking about homeschooling, and they're not homeschooling. Just like Angela said, they're not virtual schooling. It is not homeschooling that they are doing. They're doing some sort of emergency schooling. And I'm really concerned that people think, oh, this is what homeschooling is like. I've seen what these people are doing. This is not homeschooling. This is significantly harder. It doesn't keep the needs and capacities of the child in mind. It doesn't take the needs and capacities of parents in mind. So what I'm seeing is it's Corona schooling, if you want to call it something. But homeschooling is different. You have the opportunity to get to know your child. You have the opportunity to figure out where are they really strong? Where is their wheelhouse? How can I keep them in their wheelhouse as much as I possibly can? And you find out about your own child. Whereas what's happening right now is they're getting stuff on a screen, and one size fits none. So this is what I'm seeing. Is I'm seeing. I don't even know what to call it. It feels almost slightly Soviet to me, you know, day wear, evening wear, morning wear, and it's all the same drab gray gown. So I'm really concerned that people think this is homeschooling. The other thing that I'm really concerned about is that within a year, I'm sure that we're going to be hearing that some of these children who were in the government school were hurt when they were quote unquote homeschooling, that they were already under CPS. They were already on that radar screen, and it wasn't homeschooling that caused that. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. Those of us in the homeschooling community are concerned that people are saying, oh, this is what homeschooling is. No, this is not what homeschooling is.
Kelly?
I'd love to, jump in here. I mean, I think the main thing to remember is, even though it's been going for months, it still is, a singular event that we're experiencing. And maybe I tend to bring, because we work with some public school districts as Prenda, I feel kind of a connection and an understanding. I don't see it as a conspiracy. I see a lot of well-intentioned people trying to do their best. I think the thing, as I've studied it and tried to understand what's going on, is it all boils down to this quote by Plutarch. Anytime you can take it way back to the ancient Rome, you probably should, right? And the quote is, "The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled." And I think the basic distinction here, and I think I hear this in what Angela and Anne are both saying, is we have gotten used to school being about filling vessels, like pouring knowledge into heads efficiently, and then hopefully it's still there when they take the test in the spring and you see these test results. Unfortunately, that's an inaccurate mental model, and we've all seen, and parents have seen this, of what happens to your child as they accept that. It's other people setting the terms and parameters and the hoops to jump through. And there's people, like I was one of the ones that did it well. I was good at hoop jumping and I got good grades. I have family members who struggle, right? It doesn't feel that way. And in both cases, you develop this very fixed mindset of, I'm either good at school, so I don't have to try, or I'm not good at school, so I won't try, because what's the point? And in both cases, you're actually falling short of that Plutarch ideal of lighting fires. So I know that's high level philosophical. I think the main thing that I'm seeing that's exciting to me about this is we're talking about it, we're thinking about it. And it's, I think parents to a large extent have sort of checked out or kind of outsourced this important function. What's happening now is people with passion and all the right gifts and attributes are stepping up to the plate. So our microschool model is just that, and I can go into that, but it's basically saying, if you love kids and you care about learning, if you can help light those fires, you can run a microschool, 5 to 10 kids in your house, and we'll give you all the tools so everything's standards aligned and accountability's there and all of the boxes are checked. But the main thing is not about checking boxes or filling vessels. It's about lighting fires. And we've been doing this now for several years, and we've been growing anyway. I think in the middle of COVID, it's now lots and lots more people talking about it, obviously. And my goal is to make sure we do that well. We communicate exactly what we're doing when we're talking about lighting fires as opposed to filling vessels. And I want to bring that to all communities, not just the ones who can pay for it.
Yeah, Kelly, can you say just a little bit more about how Prenda works? And I think people understand Georgia Cyber Academy, and they understand homeschool. I'm pointing to where the people are on my screen. How those work. But can you say a little bit about how Prenda works so people know where you're from?
Sure. And you've heard about these pods or micro schools. We started in 2018, January 2018, with our first micro school. It was literally me, and I pulled my son, Asher, out of school, and 6 of my friends pulled their kids out. We were sitting around my kitchen table. And I had never homeschooled before. I was one of those parents that thought about it, but felt like it was too scary, or I didn't know if I would do it right. But I got to the point where I was watching my kids in school. I had volunteering as a library at the public library, teaching kids computer programming. So I was watching in this learning laboratory, and I was seeing the huge difference between a child who wants to learn and makes a choice, and a child who resists at all costs. And what I saw with my own kids was resistance at all costs. And what I saw at Code Club when I was working with these kids was these kids want to learn. So I pulled these kids together. I didn't have a plan or anything really built, but I think you'll hear Anna and others talk about this, is when you can almost be humble enough to allow the learning to happen. And if the goal is to get that fire lit, we were able to personalize it. 7 kids, right? I knew those kids well. I knew, and not just in a fluffy, like, hey, whatever you want sort of way, like in the way a piano teacher or a coach that knows you so well and loves you so much that they're able to push you to be your best. It was like those types of conversations. And it was beautiful. I mean, I literally sent messages out within weeks to my friends, and I said, I've seen something, you guys. It's like, this is exciting for the future of education. I had no idea that all of this would come and that we would be here just 2 years later, growing. I think we're going to reach 2,000 students here soon. So from 7 a couple of years ago, it's been a fast growth, and we're excited about that. And like I've said, my goal now as the leader of this organization, we've got a good team, is to build systems and processes that will just effectively open up. So Eric, that didn't really answer your question, but the micro school itself is a dedicated, caring adult, somebody that passes our threshold for safety. They can be with kids. We're going to train them and help them see the culture of what we're trying to do. Our mission is really simple because we knew we needed lots of people to remember it. It's empower learners. We're really talking about kids as self-learners that will be able to go through their life and pick up whatever skills and knowledge they need to be successful, whatever that looks like for them. If we can get them to that point, that's power for them in their life. So empower learners. And then we've built a model that allows a regular person, in quotes, these are not regular people, these are astonishing, caring people, but there's not a particular academic pedigree or something we're looking for with these learning guides. We want to include them in this process. In fact, we want to rely on them heavily for this one-to-one powerful connection that's really critical for great learning to happen. And then the question, once you have that pod now, is what do they need to be successful? And so there's all the back end around, we're working through various, like I said, district, charter, various programs to access state funding so these kids can come whether or not their parents are able to pay. We're working on all of the regulation that goes with that. We're working on all the curriculum and academics. We're doing benchmark testing and state testing and special ed interventions, all the things that you would need. But that, we can support all of that. The core experience is that one learning guide. Often this is the mom of one of the kids in the class. So just to give you a picture, and they're meeting in someone's home. It's kids riding scooters in the neighborhood. In a way, it's bringing back this almost one-room schoolhouse that I think is a bygone relic, but it's now it's tech-enabled and it's modern and it uses cutting-edge ideas from academics. I mean, our kids are doing project-based learning and blended learning for mastery, so they're moving at their own pace. They're personalized. They're doing Socratic dialogue and discussion and debating things. And so you put all these pieces together, it's the best things, I think, of various models, and you can kind of combine it to create this, just, I don't know another word to use except for just really empowering experience for the kids and for the adults that are involved.
Yeah, that's great. That, let's stick with homeschooling for just a minute too. There's been a good bit of polling since the spring that shows parents are generally, not entirely, but generally feeling a little bit warmer towards homeschooling than they thought they would going into it, right? But just before school started shutting down in March, there was this debate going on about homeschooling. Specifically, there was a professor and some people from Harvard attacking the entire premise of homeschooling. Go forward to July, like in Gwinnett County, and we've got lots of people who are actively pushing to force people to do school from home now, which has been an interesting change, I think. You've also got people who are going to be doing online schooling this fall, who feel like they were promised certain services and are now not getting them, right? Although, as Kelly said, we are in kind of a unique situation. But let's start with Anna this time. How should we think about parents' kind of rights and roles and responsibilities now and sort of post-corona, when we've got all these new things sort of sprouting?
All right, well, so I come from a philosophy that the state has the role of securing life, liberty, and property, and that the government its existence is to protect against force or fraud, and my children could say this to you probably verbatim, by others, and to maximize the spirit of like voluntary association and also free action. So that's a pretty specific worldview that I'm coming from. So not every homeschooler is going to share this. In education, I think the state has to intervene when a child has harm inflicted on them. And I also think that parents, when they have children, they incur duties. I'm not talking about a parent's rights, but a parent has a duty to provide things like food, shelter, clothing, and to a certain extent, education. That doesn't mean that they have to pay for the child's college, but they do need to be able to put a human being out into the world who can fend for themselves and to be to a certain degree civic-minded, and they need to be competent. The person that the parent is actually accountable to is the child. And if you think that being accountable to the state gives you sort of a feeling inside of you that's a little bit uncomfortable, when you think about being accountable to your child, you don't just have skin in the game, you have DNA in the game. And being accountable to your child is far, far more important, I think. But all right, so the question that you're asking is, you started with the Harvard thing. There are opponents to homeschooling for sure. Elizabeth Bartholet, while she says that she's the woman that wrote that 80-page, she's the Harvard professor, law professor, who wrote an 80-page paper that was picked up by the Arizona Law Review, and it was also sort of written up in the Harvard Alumni Magazine. So what she's saying, what she's suggesting, is that we have a presumptive ban on homeschooling. And there was also supposed to be a symposium at Harvard to talk about this presumptive ban on homeschooling. So this is what's in our rearview mirror right now. And the only reason it's in our rearview mirror is because Corona happened. Now, what Harvard made a miscalculation, and the miscalculation was that homeschoolers are just these nice mommies in denim dresses, and that they don't really have a whole lot in common, and that they're not actually going to be able to rise up as one when you essentially make a threat to their children. But that's exactly what homeschooling parents do. I mean, we've got the time. So what has happened is that people have thought, well, okay, we can count on our policymakers to sort of regulate homeschooling. We want more regulation in homeschooling. What they're finding is that when policymakers try to regulate homeschooling heavily, homeschoolers show up and tell policymakers, you will not be regulating us heavily. And so now what they're thinking is, well, maybe there's another way around. Maybe we can use the courts to regulate homeschooling. And so that is what they're trying to do. Elizabeth Bartholet actually says that the Constitution is outdated and insufficient. And what she's trying to do is she's trying to take us from a traditional interpretation of the Constitution, which is a negative rights interpretation, and swing it around to a positive rights interpretation. And she would tell you that everybody, of course, would be allowed to homeschool. They would just have to apply to the government in order to do so. This is not okay. And homeschoolers do not want this. But Okay, so that's the whole Harvard thing. How should we think about parents' rights? I think about parents' duties, and I also think about I don't remember the case, but there was a case in the 1920s in a very progressive era that in which the court said that the child is not a mere creature of the state, and it is our duty as parents to get them into adulthood. We need to be able to do that. We don't need the government co-parenting with us. That is not okay. And here, the arguments that they're using are cherry-picked, and they're actually sort of scare tactics. There's not a whole lot of compelling evidence to show that homeschooling parents are abusing children. What they're doing is they're taking 2, 3, 4 cases of parents who had their children in government schools. Children were being monitored by CPS or some public service agency to make sure that they weren't being hurt. And then the parents took them out of the school to quote unquote homeschool them, and then CPS lost track of them essentially, and then they were harmed. And this is being used to say that there should be this presumptive ban on homeschooling. No, this is what's going to come back around, and this is why I'm saying that in this next year, while all of these people are homeschooling, know that there are children who've been going to school and that CPS has their eye on, who have been lost, because now the children, of course, are not in the school. That is not an issue with homeschooling. That is an issue with Child Protective Services, and children should be protected. It's not happening though.
Yeah, so that's great. So Kelly and Angela, you probably attract a lot of homeschoolers or have some homeschooling aspects to your models. What do you all think about parents' sort of rights, roles, and responsibilities here?
I'll go first, Angela, and then you can take it.
Sure.
I'm not a legal expert or a legal scholar, so I don't feel qualified to answer about the cases or the rights. What I have seen is that there are a lot of people that, as parents want certain things for their kids, and we want to provide, these options for them. I've mentioned, a lot of people both in and out of government funded systems that agree with that and that are trying to provide a portfolio of services. I guess one thing that's really interesting, and you'll hear this kind of counterpoint back, is like, what about the ones who can't, right? Who can't provide? Or one of the things that's been really neat is to see communities step up and accommodate those kids. So we have, for example, it's a kind of a right on the edge of like a gentrified versus non-gentrified neighborhood. And there's a mom that's been teaching piano for 20 years. And she has a microschool, a couple of her own kids, a couple of her friends' kids. These kids are going to be okay either way. Like, their moms all could have homeschooled, but there's maybe 3 or 4 kids in her microschool that could not have had that opportunity. The parents weren't in a position. One of the parents was in jail. There's different reasons why those kids would not have been reached by a pure homeschool option. And it was fun to be able to watch. I mean, it was beautiful to see these kids step up and receive that same love and care from this person that maybe they wouldn't. I don't, they could have in other settings, but it was able to happen in a microschool in a way that flexibility was there. And it took a lot of work. I mean, ask any educator, they're definitely, it's a messy job educating anyone. But when there's backstory and complications, it's hard. And so definitely want to be sensitive to that. I believe that the number one, we call it start with heart. Prenda has a core value that the first thing we're looking for is, do you really care? Can you see this student as a human being and honor just reverence that, right? Like what they're worth and who they are as a person. And can you respect what they're capable of? And can you see that in every kid? So we talk a lot about that. And that's really what we're trying to select on. And this woman in the story, and we've seen this over and over again in the microschool guides that are running these, they live that, right? They're able to see not only their own kids, but other kids through this lens of, I see you, I care about you, and I believe in what you're capable of. And again, that doesn't mean it's rainbows and unicorns all the time. There's tears and there's hard work and there's grit. But in the end, it's, you know, you look back, hopefully, and I think most of us can look back at somebody in our life, whether an educator or otherwise, that held us to a standard and did it because they loved us, and that came through. My goal is just to create more and more of those contact points, and to not just rely on the people who have the job. I think they have a really important role in all of this, but I think lots more of us can participate in a way that's actually exciting.
And I think that having homeschooled my own children when they were young, because they were very advanced and the public school system didn't really meet their needs for as advanced as they were, I found that I got into virtual school because I wound up I had middle schoolers taking high school courses, a lot of them, and I needed an accredited institution so that they wouldn't have to jump through hurdles or have their education questioned. So I wanted an accredited option, and Georgia Cyber Academy gave that to me as an accredited public school. So I kind of married homeschooling with virtual education. But then whether by hook or by crook or by my notoriety, I got elected to the school board. So I found that I know that not every parent is capable of educating their children through college courses, and my husband and I are. So I wanted to be more involved, and being on the board for a number of years at Georgia Cyber Academy and then stepping down into the role of superintendent gave me the opportunity to make this a viable option for parents that that might not be able to educate, but they wanted to instill the values of their home life and to protect that and their core group around their students, as well as they wanted the opportunity to participate in their child's learning and learn alongside of them, and to do so in a safe and comfortable environment. And that also attributed to parents that had children with medical issues, or ones that perhaps were bullied, or children that were not comfortable around being other children that were obese or had facial deformities or many other things, or going through life circumstances or challenges, and they've had some epiphany and needed to go back to school and didn't want to be, they were 2 years behind and they didn't want to be, they felt embarrassed. And this gives the opportunity for a lot of those students. And being the superintendent of the school, I also understand the fact that I'm funded by taxpayer dollars, and that I needed to make sure that a virtual option was accountable to the state and to those taxpayer dollars. So I and the board, with the support of the board, set apart on a mission to make sure that we were accountable through attendance options and through measures. We give an insane number of tests. And I said insane because most people would go away from testing. In a virtual environment that is funded by taxpayer dollars, it is the way that we are accountable to our community and to our legislators and to our taxpayers and to our families. So it also informs the classroom, because we don't believe in giving tests just to give tests. We actually use all of that data, and we can disaggregate it at any given moment to find out what they need. So all that to say is, in a virtual school that is publicly funded, there has to be a measure of accountability that goes back. There has to be. And it is possible to have attendance in a virtual environment. It is possible to have accountability, and I believe in being accountable. But it also gives parents that don't have the education to necessarily be the facilitator or the teacher in the classroom, or to give them the opportunity. But it allows them to grow those relationships that homeschooling does, where you can see them grow into good, kind, empathetic individuals that are conscientious contributors to the community. So much like Kelly's micro schools, I think virtual education can be used by those that don't necessarily have the ability to be homeschool parents in and of themselves, not because they don't want to be, but because they don't have the education when you get into those higher level courses. And they might not have the funding to do that. So if you have a publicly funded virtual school, you have the state, we've married the funding to the school that allows parents that don't have the education to still be there and connected to their children through their education. but they're doing so in an accountable way, and we're making sure that they come out with the same standards. Now, that to say, I think that there's some work that can be done on funding. I think it's gone a long time toward virtual schools. I'm funded at 2/3 of what my other charter schools in the state of Georgia are. I think people are learning really quick that it is very expensive to fund it. So perhaps this event that we're all going through will bring to light that full funding is warranted even in a virtual environment, because I want to provide more electives. I want to provide tutoring one-to-one programs. I want to provide higher salaries to my teachers, but a lot of times in a charter environment, those are things, but even in a virtual environment, it's much worse because we're not funded at the same amount of it. But I think that it will bring to light that virtual education is every bit as expensive as a face-to-face event. But more so, I think this gives opportunity to parents if they want to stay home, but they don't have the education, or they don't feel comfortable, or they want an accredited transcript, that they can do this, and the state is actually supporting them in a way to do that by offering a virtual school to them. But I don't want the perception to be that a fully online virtual school is what people are experiencing throughout the state of Georgia right now, because they are not. We really do have live classes 5 days a week, 5 days a week in math and English and social studies and science. We have labs. We have virtual field trips. That is what virtual education is. And what we're experiencing right now is just not that in the state of Georgia.
So if you don't mind me jumping in, so when parents don't have the education, some people are afraid, oh, I don't know anything about music. I don't know anything about music. In our family, we are not musicians. We have a son who goes to the Curtis Institute of Music, which is the best music school in the country, if not the world. We don't know anything about music. We had no idea. And yet, even without any education in this subject, he was able to do this. You do not have to be educated. You don't have to be a teacher. You don't have to have a certification. Frankly, you can send your child to Khan Academy online, and that is not a problem. I have seen so many parents learn right alongside of their children. When a child needs to be homeschooled, what happens is that the parents come along with the child. And so the parent has this, sometimes they'll have a curriculum in front of them usually when they're still green and they're still afraid, they'll have a curriculum in front of them. And there are plenty of things online that are frankly free. There isn't anything that you need to teach your child that you cannot find online. So if you're here and you're listening and you're thinking, I don't have a qualification to homeschool my kid. No, you do. And the greatest qualification that you have is that you care about your child and you want to send them out into the world prepared. And so I needed to say that, because a lot of parents think I don't have the qualifications, but you do. And you have all of these great resources.
And Anna's right. But in my area, I live in Milton, Georgia. It's fairly affluent. But the thing is that I don't teach flute, but my daughter took flute lessons, but I could pay for her to go flute lessons. And she did pottery, and she did art, and she did oils, and she did musical theater. But as a homeschool parent, and I think Anna would agree, funding is not available through the state for homeschooling. And I think a lot of parents that want to homeschool that might not have the opportunity to do so, because there may be a 2-income family, or there may be a single income family, or they may not have the funds to go and have these additional class or expertise. And there's a lot of ways to get around there. There can be co-ops, or they can be a friend that does it, and a lot of others. But when those resources are not available, I think that virtual education does marry some of that gives that opportunity for that to be there. I just want all kids to have the opportunities of every child, whether they are economically challenged or wherever they live in rural Georgia or North Georgia or anywhere in the country. And I think that when we are a statewide school, we're in every county and every district in the state of Georgia. I can give AP classes to kids in rural Georgia. I can give lessons in music to someone that's somewhere else. We can do all of those things. And I think that and to Anna's point, and I think she would agree with me, I was a homeschool parent and I did it very well, and I did it very successfully. I have seen it done less successfully. I think that there's a lot of parents that are very committed to their children. And I think that a lot of options need to be out there. And I think all of them need to be funded, because again, I truly believe that the parent is the only one that decides what's the type of education that is best for their children. And I think that the money should follow the children. So that is my own personal view on that.
Eric, I'd like to jump in if I could for a moment. Thank you. I think it's important to look broadly across the state. And in my role as the Speaker Pro Tem, I mean, one advantage is it does put you in a lot of different communities where you see, you know, unevenness in education and education options. But we have 1.7 million children that are in public schools. They're not all going to become homeschooling kids. They're not all going to become virtual long-term, and they're not all going to do micro schools. The vast majority of them are going to be long-term in a classroom with a teacher, and that is that family's choice. It was the choice of my husband and I with our 4 children. They graduated from Milton High School, and they had a good experience. What I do think, as someone who passionately supports all choices for parents and their students and their children, is that the pandemic, I think, will give us opportunities to provide more opportunities, whether it is in a more public school setting, you know, where the children, I think you'll see more online schooling, both through their public school system, but also through a virtual school like Georgia Cyber Academy. I think you'll see more people who will feel more comfortable with becoming that homeschooling parent like you, Anna, because they've spent a lot of time with their kids now, and they see that the supports are out there for them to take on that role, and they feel more comfortable with it. The one that I think is really intriguing to me are the micro schools, because they're going to take what I'm hearing from Fulton County parents, it's going to take many different roles. Some will be hiring a tutor for their children and another family's children. Some will hire a teacher. Some will become that teacher, like Anna, like you are. They will become that teacher. But our state laws do not fully embrace all these different iterations, and it'll be different for each family. But I do want to say that, you know, I've read several times now that about 1/3 of jobs in the country are conducive to a flexible working arrangement, meaning different location, be that at home, part-time, full-time, and not being in an office. But that does mean that 2/3 are not. That person who works in the nursing home, who works at the grocery store, the intensive care nurse, the doctor who, you know, is a hospitalist. There are many jobs. And, you know, unlike, say, when I was first raising my children, where there was still a pretty high percentage of women that were home, now the majority with children, young children at home, are working at some, you know, either full-time or part-time. And so they will still need more of a public school environment so that they can support their family. We also have many single parents now who need, you know, they choose and need to work full-time. And so I just think we need to think broadly with all of these choices. And I mean, those of you who know me know I am 100% supportive of how you want to define, you know, the best educational environment for your child. But we can't lose sight of the fact that we are facing an unprecedented time right now with many children this fall, in a month, will not be in what had been what their parents considered the best choice for them in a classroom with supervision, with nutrition, with a nurse, you know, down the hall. We have many children with special needs that it would be very difficult to meet their needs at home, because many of those parents work and they don't have that flexibility or the, you know, the mental space, frankly, to arrange all the things to make a full educational experience. That's where my concern is. And I do think that, whether you agree with it or not, public schools have come to mean many things. Yes, they do mean some daycare for some of these children after school. Yes, they in fact are food banks for some of these children, where they offer weekend meals. We have healthcare clinics in these schools, and we've now gone an entire spring with most of these children not getting the variety of needs that they need getting their needs met. And now we're looking at it this fall, and it'll be interesting looking back, because I do believe, as you mentioned, in accountability. What did they learn? What were the upsides and downsides? And let me tell you, I've seen a lot of upsides just where I live. I see families spending time together that didn't have that time together before because they were so busy. And but I also realize that we're a very diverse state, and we have a lot of folks who can barely pay their bills, much less embrace and fully take the lead on educating their children. And so I personally will be looking at next year what do we need to do to facilitate more of these rich options for families, not just financially, but legally, and in offering flexibility for them, because as one of you mentioned earlier, one size doesn't fit all. But I will say, for many, many, many parents, the more needed option is a public school classroom. Now, it might be a charter school, public charter school. It might be a public virtual school like yours. It might be but they need a more structured type environment so that they can work and put food on the table. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I have a few more questions, and I'm going to start by bouncing off of that last bit there. So the audience knows I'm going to try to pull in some of the audience questions as I ask these too. But just to start, maybe we start with let's say Kelly this time. I don't think you've gone first yet. As Representative Jones said, most kids are still in conventional schools now and after this is over with. So what are just a couple of things that a very conventional school could learn from each of your different experiences to help people now and as we go forward?
Yeah, I think
practices or just,
it's great. It's a great question. And Representative, I mean, I agree with you completely. I would be a complete idiot to say this is the solution for everyone. We want to bring this to families where this solves their problem, and there's lots of problems, and there's lots that these institutions we've come to rely on. So I would say just question number one is just ask yourself, what are you trying to do? And if you can think in terms of segments, the districts that we've been talking to, school districts that are, visionary thinkers, they recognize that it's not just this kind of body of homogeneous like kids. It's like there's this group and this group, and they're looking for different things. And so being able to think like that can provide flexibility to better meet the needs. And by the way, you take some kids out and have microschools, now you're better equipped to serve the ones that don't want that on campus. So we've definitely found some great synergies just in terms of where kids go. That's just the very first level of thinking. I mean, I think there's an additional layer, and we're just starting to tap into this as we've done more work with, inside of kind of traditional schools. But yeah, this idea of, it's back to what I said at the very beginning of learning as a fire to be kindled. Teachers get that too. And I think there's a capability of just allowing agency to be a bigger part of the model, allowing, it's very tempting to think about, well, I've got to get kids from here to here, so I'm just going to kind of shove them through or run them through an assembly line, and instead to try to recognize, individuals and and lean on technology, not for the sake of technology, but technology as a way to deliver more personalized experiences. So I'd be careful with all of that. Everything I just said can go terribly wrong if done poorly. It'd be better to just not do it than to do it poorly. But I've definitely seen, I have hope for the visionary people that I have worked with inside of traditional systems where these types of concepts and ideas can be really widely utilized. There's nothing special about the home. These groups of 5 to 10 definitely make it easier, and being really clear about our focus of empowering learners, that frees us up as well, right? So we can really focus on that. But I think my advice would be look at segments, try to meet needs of different groups, which are going to be different. And then, how can you just ask these hard questions of what is it for? Why are we doing this? What are our goals? And those answers can be different in different systems.
Angela, you're already unmuted. So
to Representative Jones' point, I agree with her. And I think I've said it probably a lot less eloquently than she did, because I'm pretty direct. So I'm not going to use my verbiage that I typically say about why there's a need for brick and mortar public schools. They're not going away. Virtual schools are not going to ever be able to replace them. And that is absolutely true, because there are 2-income families and single-income families, and people need school systems for something more than lighting the fire of the vessels that they fill. They have to have them. And I think about all the times, that's one of the things that really frustrates me as a virtual school is I don't offer lunches. I know flat out that and I actually have it on my website. Look, we can't do this in a virtual environment. So I am telling you, I think that food comes before the education. So if that's something that you need, I think that children need to go to the public school because they need breakfast and they need lunch. And I'm very passionate about that. But I also think that the option of virtual schools is good. What I actually find it interesting, I think it was in November, October, I've met with other superintendents from other districts, the larger districts in the state of Georgia and that surround Atlanta. And I had asked them like a couple of months before Corona hit, do you have one-to-one technology? And they told me no. And I said, well, maybe you need to think about doing that now, because think about what you could do in a classroom with a computer. You could have kids on their laptops in your classrooms, and you could better serve them with scaffolded instructional tools. And if something changes or a better tool comes out, you could immediately change and not be in a 5-year plan with it. Your efficiencies would go up with what you do. Think about the fact that you would have an inclement weather event and you would just have your kids already at home with their computers and they'd already have their books with them, and we could immediately transition. Think about the fact that you could use this model within a physical environment and the technological tools that are available to be able to immediately serve a student that is out with the flu or the student that is hospital homebound. You know, this is not something that we should look at as emergency education as an isolated event at this moment or a pandemic plan. This is something that we can put in place holistically in a physical environment, a virtual environment, a homeschool environment, so that we can serve no matter what the situation we find ourselves in, and education doesn't stop. Because that's the whole thing is, right? We got to serve kids. And it doesn't matter if there's an ice storm outside or there's a pandemic or the school building was found to have asbestos or the air conditioning system went out or whatever it is. That looking at educational tools and models in isolation as opposed to a holistic plan that serves your community in many different ways, as long as you put the tools in place for the accountability to work in every one of those environments, and you put the accountability for attendance in place to be there for those students, however you measure that, whether it be actual live attendance or recorded sessions asynchronously or lessons finished. I mean, there's lots of ways to do that, or a combination of all of them, I think is probably better. But we're looking at something as, what do we do for now? And we're spending money for now when we should be spending as how do we look to the future, and we're creating an environment due to a horrible event. But, you know, horrible events force us to be better and to change and to evolve. And I think that that is what I would like brick and mortar physical systems to look at as, okay, now I'm here and I've seen what happens when this model doesn't work. How do I pandemic proof it? How do I inclement weather proof the educational system? And we move forward from there. And I think that having a discussion with private and public and homeschool and all of us coming together to share our knowledge to have those is huge, because public school is not bad, and brick and mortar public school is not bad, and private school is not bad, and homeschooling is not bad, and virtual is not bad. Everything has value. We need to come together to make value work for children as they need it and in whatever the event or environment is at that moment.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on. I think this might end up being the last question, but it's an important one. So given all of this, you all represent sort of atypical school models. Typical schools are experimenting with atypical things now. Probably more parents are going to be looking for atypical situations, whether they are private or public, in 2021 and beyond. And policymakers are going to be looking at various ways to understand them, right? So in some sense, it's all gray area, and it doesn't matter if you call it emergency schooling or corona schooling or whatever. But in a policy sense, sometimes it matters a lot, right? We've argued for a long time about what level of funding online schools should get, right? These hybrid homeschools that I worked with a few years ago, it mattered a lot whether they were classified as homeschoolers or private school kids in terms of whether they got a Hope Scholarship. And we could come up with a huge list of things like this, right? We've had things like education savings accounts in Florida. In South Carolina this week, the governor announced new support to help families with different kinds of options. Oklahoma's governor did something similar. What are a couple of just practical things regarding accountability or policy or whatever that policymakers should think about as we kind of move forward with expanding the expanding strangeness of schooling after the coronavirus? Right, Anna, you didn't get to go last time, so maybe you can start this one.
This is the question I know the least about, so great.
Good.
I don't want state money. I don't want state funding as a homeschooler. Some homeschoolers do. Some people want for the money to follow the child, and that's great. But for me, I want the state as far away from my children as I can get it, because they don't look at the individual. They can't. I was listening to a talk that Alan November gave about who owns the learning. And this is one of those things that homeschoolers are very passionate about. Who owns the learning? Is it me as the homeschooling parent who owns the learning? No, it's the child who owns the learning. I'll tell you a little story. I was very gung ho when I started homeschooling. I was very interested in scope, sequence, accountability, testing. All of that was very interesting to me. That was all I knew, because I had come from a public school background. And so I thought that was the right way to go. What I didn't realize was that given the opportunity to learn things, my children were going to go down rabbit holes, and they were going to follow their interests, and they were going to become powerful learners, not because of me, but because in spite of me. And I think that most homeschoolers figure this out at some point, that really what they need to do is they need to get out of the way of the learner. So the person who owns the learning is the person who is doing the learning, not the person who is there to facilitate the learning. I would really like, besides following the money following the child or the learner, just like we have with food stamps or any kind of money that the government is giving out that follows the person. I mean, we've got models in place for this. The money should follow the learner. But what I'm really interested in seeing is teachers understanding that the learning that's owned by the child, and that can be done in a lot of different ways. I mean, teachers have to teach an entire school full of kids a math curriculum, and everybody has to learn the same thing on the same day, get the same test at the same day. This is not how human beings learn. that's what machines do, but that is not what human beings do. And we've figured it out, and homeschoolers are proving that over and over again, all the time. If you look at the individual, you're going to get really, really different results than even private schools, if you're able to look at the individual. And I think that this is doable even in a government school setting. Even it can happen. And there are models. The child can learn at home. They could do virtual at home. And then when they came back into school, the teacher could be there with interesting questions, and they could be in there to sort of guide them towards projects that are huge and exciting for them. So if I were to take anything from homeschooling and give it as a gift to a brick and mortar school, it would be allow your children to own their learning, get out of their way.
That's great. I like that. So we've got about 5 minutes. So Kelly, what are one or two really practical things that policymakers should think about?
Yeah, specifically policy. I mean, number one is don't attack it. I think you've seen California, Oregon. There's been places where specific bills have come out preventing kids from changing schools, forcing online schools to stop during COVID. I mean, I think anytime there's a crisis, people will say things like, don't let a crisis go to waste. And there's people who don't want these options to exist. And so I would just say, number one is, watch out for that. If we can just keep the rules the same. I would say number two is I agree. I think watching Oklahoma and South Carolina is useful, right? I think it's at least raising some interesting questions. I'm more willing to make a compromise with the state than Anna is, and where we see ourselves as kind of in the middle of saying we're actually okay with, saying kids should learn to read and kids should learn math, and here's how we're going to show that. We've found a way where we can do that without crushing souls, and so we're excited about that model, and we want to bring that to parents who find value in our mission of empowering kids as learners. I would say on microschools, I'm actually wary. I think people have come to me and said, let's write some legislation around microschools. I think there's a possible outcome where that's good, and maybe more possible outcomes where that ends up bad. And so we've been doing it under basically virtual school legislation, either through districts or charters, where there's already a legal regulatory framework for operating remotely. What we're asking for is the government to look at the educational side of what we're doing as virtual learning, because it's the same thing. We're under the same accountability. And then on the physical side of what we're doing, we're looking to in-home childcare, which has typically a much more functional, pragmatic approach to like facilities and space and safety. I mean, we care about these things. So, but we're not looking for the Department of Ed to come in and start regulating the inside of people's houses, if that makes sense. I see a lot of ways that goes wrong. So to the extent we can kind of build those walls and say, look, we're going to regulate education this way, and then any sort of gatherings, if needing to be regulated at all. In some states, I mean, really, like the second you have another kid that's not yours come into your home, it's like the state says, okay, now I think New York's one of these, you're a private school. And so here's our list of, 150 things that private schools have to be. I mean, trying to just make that flexible and give, the main, I think, spirit of all of this is you have parents and community members that want to step in and participate in meaningful ways. Let's not cripple them. Like, let's give them freedom to do that. I'm not even asking for aids. It's just like, allow the space to do that. If there's funding for it, even better, because that allows me to fulfill my mission of reaching kids that can't pay for this with their own money.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're about at time. I'm going to hand it back to Kyle. I mean, we could talk about, teacher training and certification. We could talk about all kinds of various forms of funding that play into all these things. Kyle's going to come back and talk. Thank you so much to Kelly Smith and Anna Martin and Angela Lassetter and Representative Jones for a great conversation today. Kyle, thanks for letting me ask the questions.
Absolutely. Well, let me add my thanks to each of you and to you as well, Eric. just a really fascinating discussion. I wish the audience could show their appreciation but with applause, but please just know that you know, your remarks were very insightful and very helpful to moving education forward here. As we wrap up, I just want to thank our sponsors one more time. Those would be our presenting sponsor, AT&T, our platinum sponsors, Verizon, the Walton Family Foundation, and our silver sponsor, Georgia Realtors. You can see them on their screen now. This is possible because of them. And please, everyone, plan to join us next week as we continue exploring adaptation with a look at the state budget, which certainly had to adapt a great deal once the pandemic hit and businesses started shutting and people lost incomes. So that session will begin at 11 a.m. next Tuesday, July 28th. And we hope everyone will be able to join us for that. Until then, thank you for being with us today, and we're adjourned.